Yay. Woohoo.
Go live. All right, live.
Woo.
All right.
Awesome.
We're here with Molly, and she's an OwnersUP member, and she's talking about sleep as a skill, and that is her company. She was traveling all around the world and then being an entrepreneur nomad, and she was experiencing sleeping issues.
Oh yeah. Yes, exactly. So I'll just dive right in on that story. And before I guess, into my personal, history or connection with sleep, I just want to quickly go over some of the things that I'd love to share in this talk, really. And the topic of today's talk is why sleep needs to be your top priority. And it's great because I'm not an MD, I'm not a sleep scientist. I am a person that literally learned this the hard way and went through the biggest roller coaster with my sleep and, through a series of things, and I'll get more into that story. But through a lot of information and learning and conversations with people in different modalities, I am now sleeping better than I'd ever slept in my life. And I'm just so passionate about this topic because I really believe that it's a real crisis in our society right now. So I'm really, really excited to share more about this. So what you'll actually learn today are, number one, the impact that a lack of sleep has on your health and productivity. Number two, a three-part framework to begin to address sleep concerns. And three, key tools and strategies to utilize when transforming your sleep. So first of all, before you even take any time, granted, like, I get it. This is Facebook Live. People are busy. I hop in these things and I'm like, ugh, this is not for me, out. So let me just tell you if this is for you, if this is not for you. If you're sleeping over 7 hours a night, if you are waking up feeling great, refreshed, birds are chirping, like, you've got this great thing figured out, amazing. I'd love to talk to you, and this talk is not for you. Really, who this conversation is for is specifically for people that have difficulty falling asleep, which was me, have difficulty staying asleep, which at times was also me, and who at the end of the night, when your alarm goes off or what have you, you wake up and you're not feeling refreshed, then, which was also me, then I had all of those ticking the box, then this conversation could be beneficial for you. So first I want to talk about why I even created this company called Sleep is a Skill. And it's because out of a lot of trial and error for myself, I discovered that my way of relating to sleep is sleep is a skill set. And I'm really making the argument that it's not something, of course, it's a natural thing that we've done since birth and what have you. However, it's something that once getting into, there's certain habits that we do that make a difference in the quality of our sleep. If you think of a great sleeper, there are certain things that they're doing day in, day out. They might not even be conscious of it, but they are consistently doing those things that get them those type of results, which are in alignment with waking up, feeling great, logging hopefully between 7 to 8 hours, whatever they've found is appropriate for them. And that's an area that's really working for them. For the rest of us, there's something that we can learn from those people and from building this skill set. So I'm also here to make the argument that sleep is really an epidemic in our society right now. So in 2016, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, called insufficient sleep a public health epidemic. Why that's really important is it's something for us to consider and this, this could get more esoteric, but really there seems to have been this glorification of sleep deprivation over the years, right? Like, you sleep when you're dead, just put the pedal to the metal, hustle out, grind it out, early bird gets the worm, you snooze, you lose. All of these sayings in our culture really put this emphasis towards sleep as an optionality or a luxury. And I'm really here to make the claim for my own life that I found that it completely, it put my life into a crossroads when it became a problem. And so I'll get more into that in just a minute. Oh, this is this fancy pants slide around just further making the point that it's geographical, the problems in sleep. This is from the CDC, looking at the prevalence of short sleep duration, so less than 7 hours a night, and looking at the particularly dark areas as being largely problematic. So between 38 to 48% of those individuals having a short sleep duration. And so it's just sort of further making the point that we're living in a society of, this is something that is there and yet maybe flying under the radar, or we're just resigned to, or it's status quo, and we're maybe not doing as much as we could be doing or know to do about it. So I had alluded to my story. Tanya had mentioned my story quickly, so I'll just further flesh out why the hell I'm so into the sleep conversation. So for me, now verging on almost 2 years ago, my boyfriend and I, we worked together in the area of behavioral change, have a few online companies in that area. And about 2 years ago, we decided to take everything we owned and literally pack up into luggage, backpack, one carry-on, and then just travel the world. And we thought it was going to be great and it's going to be amazing and just a whole other thing, and just really shake up, because we'd really been relating to ourselves as like workaholics. Our work-life balance was just like all out of whack, and this was going to be the thing. And it turned out to not be the thing. And it actually, particularly in the beginning of it and with all the stress leading up to it, and then when we began traveling and going through different time zones and different sleep environments, and hotels, Airbnbs, trains, planes, automobiles, all of that, while working on the road, my sleep completely tanked, like nothing I had ever experienced. I'd never known myself to be a particularly great sleeper anyway, and yet this became something like, okay, we got to deal with this. And through a series of, and when it got really bad was we're in Croatia, along the beautiful Mediterranean and what have you, and I literally went to a sleep clinic, or like a hospital, right, and spoke to someone. I was like, I'm not sleep, like this is so this is not workable in my life. And so what did they do? They were speaking another language. I Google Translate. They hand me their version of Ambien. And so in that moment, I knew like something's got to give, because I've known myself as, like to think of myself as going down a healthy road. I wouldn't want to rely on something. And out of that state of desperation was really when even more obsessiveness for me. I'm an obsessive person by nature. So this really opened up this whole Pandora's box of diving into this world of sleep. So from that place, we even ended up flying back to the States, speaking with different doctors here, discovered that I was having GI issues. I was having, all kinds of stomach related ulcer, all kinds of things. So I really needed to take a step back and dive into my health and my well-being. And through that process that I'm going to speak about, and some of the things that came up and that I learned that I'm really excited to share with you guys, made a huge difference in my sleep. So, okay, so what will you learn? The impact that a lack of sleep has on your health and productivity. So, some of this is like we know this, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that when you're tired, night after night after night, you're just not maybe bringing your A game. However, I think it's important to reiterate the importance of this, because we don't seem to always be doing anything about it. So I'm just going to real quick rattle off some of the known, but maybe not listen to, or, not top of mind things that it can impact. So sleeping less than 7 hours a day is linked to obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, mood disorders. I mean, and that's just the basics, but if you really get into it, how does that impact your relationships? How does that impact you at work? How does that impact your sense of well-being? Like, it's very insidious. So, and in alignment with that productivity topic that we mentioned, research conducted by the CDC indicates that large numbers of Americans experience problems associated with a lack of sufficient sleep. So for example, so this is coming out of basically some of their surveys, basically almost 50 million people in, this came out of 2016 research, but almost 50 million people reported problems concentrating during the day. 18 million Americans reported that sleep deficiency interfered with job performance. I mean, those aren't little numbers. And this is a self-assessment. So, if we really get into the research conversation of that, like, I'm sure there's other things that we're not pointing to that are outside of the scope of, self-assessments, but we'll leave it at that. So that's just some of the stuff that, like, we know when you don't sleep, you're not super productive. Maybe your health is going to be impacted. We get it. And yet we're still doing these things. Why? So I think some people aren't, and I certainly wasn't. So many of us are not aware of the immediate and long-term impact that a lack of sleep will have on our health and well-being. So I share this part because I always think this is sort of interesting. For one, it speaks to how new this area of information is, at least in the pop, culture and pop information, pop science. So in 2017, the Nobel Prize in medicine was essentially awarded to, it was broken down into 3 people, but it was around their discoveries around internal clocks and biological rhythms that govern life, circadian rhythm. So we're talking about the fact that some of these major advancements that we're understanding just came to light for the popular culture in 2017. So this is largely a new area for us to really get up under. And we're also bringing in things that are maybe arguably unnatural to our circadian rhythm and our biological rhythms that govern life. So, and we'll get into this more later, but, tech elements, artificial lighting, some of these Wi-Fi, all that sort of stuff, what that does to impact our body's rhythms. So, and I have this fancy pants little picture here. But the only reason I have this included is this was linked up around these findings of these internal clocks, and now linking up a possible correlation. It looks like a very strong correlation between neurological problems like Alzheimer's disease with sleep issues. So if you look at, I'm like pointing to the screen, you can see me point, but if you look at the blue brain over on the left, that's kind of more of like a normal brain that's, able to at night flush out some of the waste products that come about each night. On the right is this problematic, scary red coloration, which is a buildup of this beta amyloid, which is known as these plaques that we also, interestingly enough, see in people that have neurological issues down the road. So that's the possible long-term issues. And even on the short term, what that means is so these hardened plaques that build up in your brain at night, when you're sleeping, they get to be flushed out. It's like a beautiful, wonderful process. It's a janitorial process. If you're not sleeping sufficiently, you're not allowing and gifting your brain and your body the opportunity to do these janitorial processes, which particularly impact the brain. And as you can see in this image, it can be a problem both, with immediate kind of brain fog, how you are when you're just you pulled some sort of all-nighter, you've only gotten a couple hours, and then, you're like that fogginess, right? Or maybe you get a headache, or all those sort of things happen in the immediate. But on the long term, we want to be mindful that this could be having some effects down the road. So really interesting research, particularly out of Matthew Walker. If anyone wants to nerd out on some of these topics, he's got some amazing stuff. So we're making the argument that there's some real health and productivity impacts when we're not sleeping regularly. at the levels that we might like. Okay, great. So how do we begin to address sleep concerns? For me, I've started to break down in people that I'm working with now. And so part of my enthusiasm around this is I'm putting together a course around on the topic of sleep and ways to use behavioral change, which is what the background that I have with Nonverbal Group, which is one of the companies that I've been working with for a while. That's all in this conversation of how to shift our behavior over the long term, which is not necessarily an easy thing to do. So that's why, like, we know we go to sleep, like have a bedtime, go to sleep, wake up. Like, it might be so simple, and yet it's not so simple. So there's a number of things that we want to address. So in developing this sort of methodology, I've come up with this 3-part system, which is really around, one, your physiology, so your body. So looking at, some people have pain management issues. So they're, it's a little tricky to sleep when, your entire back is like on fire, or when you have hormonal changes that are happening. So how do those physical changes impact your sleep, and what can we do to make a difference in that area? Then the second part, psychology, your mind. So, I mean, a lot of this is like common sense, but it's important to kind of break down how this works. So like the psychology of your mind, in that, are you having persistent stress that you have not addressed over the years? And that was me 100%, just like in living this chronic state of like, a tiger's coming and there was no tiger, you know what I mean? So looking at the psychology aspect, and that might come in the form of major life changes, whether it's, divorce, a death in the family, or related, like a loved one, a loss, a move, all those things can really stir up things for people. And we know this, you might break up with someone and you have issues sleeping for a few months, and then after a while you kind of settle. So we're looking to see whether it's, during these episodic times, or if this is a chronic issue. Environment. Then environment, we're looking at your surroundings. So what's interesting about environment is that's a topic that has kind of shifted over the years, because now we're looking at something of whether there's changes in artificial lighting, that if you really look back on the history of humankind, like before 150 years ago, we didn't even have the invention or the luxury to switch on a light switch, right? So what are the implications of that? In the past, sun would go down. Most of us would go to sleep unless you were incredibly wealthy and you could afford to have, candles and what have you, or unless you were, sort of out of the norm, something was very off, you'd be very in like a deviant spectrum of the bell curve. Or, maybe you're on some sort of like night shift situation, and you're like the only person in a particular group that had that odd setting. This was something that was very, very, very out of the norm. And the reason I bring this up and why that's important now is because of our ability to truly hack our environment with just purely on the topic of light, where it's become a norm for people to, Netflix and chill until 2 a.m, 3 a.m. And so no judgment. I've known myself to be such a night owl for so many years. And so this is an important thing to begin to notice how those things can impact you. So again, in the environmental topic, if your sleeping environment's bringing in a lot of external light, just even basics, getting blackout shades, masks if you're in variable sleeping environments, but also, looking at temperature, seeing what the temperature is regularly in your environment, ways to mitigate changes if you are someone that travels a lot or finds yourself in a couple different sleep environments. If you stay at like a girlfriend's place or whatever on a regular basis, so managing those 2 sleeping environments and mitigating sound issues and all of those things. Now, some of these things might be like, okay, yeah, of course. And yet we might not be taking the steps to make a difference. Are you packing, like when I'm traveling, I'm packing with like gaffer's tape, like, little, black tape or electrical tape, so that you cover up all the, external little sources of light. It's like, it's like you're in Vegas in a lot of these hotel rooms, so you're covering up those. Some people go to the extent of traveling with, like little black folded up sheets so they can put that over the windows. So what extent are you willing to go to get adequate sleep? So we can nerd out on that topic even further, but that gives you a basic idea of, you know, the framework. So the last thing I wanted to discuss too, key tools and strategies to utilize when transforming your sleep. So now we've, you know, kind of discussed about the impact that a lack of sleep can have on your health, your productivity. You know, we've discussed a possible framework that you could look at when addressing those things. One thing I didn't mention with that framework is when coming at it from that framework, it's almost helpful to picture kind of like a pie chart and seeing where you fall more on that framework. So for me at the time, it was a lot of psychology. Like, you know, I was stressed out, but then there was also an element of physiology because I had a lot of, you know, there's the hormonal stuff that was going on, I had the thyroid stuff. I had a whole lot of things, you know, that I had to really delve into through testing and what have you. So looking into that, and then also environment. So, you know, for me, it was, you know, like I said, traveling into these different places on a regular basis. So looking at that and taking that inventory to see what is the area that you want to hone in on that will make a difference, at least to begin. So in alignment with that, one of the first things that we can do is really what you do with any skill set. And that's, you know, what gets measured gets managed. So to begin, we need to look at your baseline. We have to take an inventory of where you're at in your sleep right now. So we can get way in the weeds on that, but that allows us to have more, you know, room and leverage and growth point from that place to then shift to an area of, you know, of behavioral change. So, some of those things that you might want to focus in on are just some key basic metrics. How long does it take you on average to fall asleep? You can start logging these things. On average, what is your regular bedtime? Is there a huge deviation when it comes to the weekend or particular days of the week, depending on your schedule? Your regular bedtime, that's like one of the cardinal things that people will look at when they're, you know, say if you were to walk into, you know, a sleep lab and ask for what they can do to make a difference in your sleep, people will routinely point to having a consistent wake up time. And that's across the board, 7 days a week, you know, none of the crazy changes and spikes over the weekend, none of that stuff. And really makes the argument that that allows us to avoid what's known as social jet lag, which is, it's almost like self-induced jet lag by completely deviating from your regular schedule a few times a week. And then what's happening is then your body's having to readjust and shift your circadian rhythm back to its norm because it wants to come to homeostasis. And if you aren't doing the work to ensure that you have as much of a consistent playing field, it really throws things out of whack on even a cellular level. It doesn't know like what time it is, what's going on, you know what I mean? So it's very important. So once you've taken that full inventory of where you're at on your sleep, and we, you know, we didn't even get into some of those longer, minute questions. There's, you know, things that you could be really monitoring if you are someone that wakes up regularly. How long are you staying up when you do wake up? You know, what are some of the things that you're currently doing to manage this problem so that we can look and see of the progress as we make a shift? So then to make a shift, number 2 would be determine your goals. So what are you, not just like, oh, I want to sleep better, I want to, like, you know, the frustration that can come out of it. Okay, so let's like dive into that. So you want to increase total average sleep time. You want to improve sleep quality. You want to shorten the time that it takes to fall asleep. Maybe that's not a problem for you. Maybe it's that you want to reduce nightly wake-ups and easily fall back asleep when they do happen. Maybe you want to reduce anxiety fixation around sleep. Like, oh, when am I going to sleep? I just spoke to a woman the other day that has problems around that. It's been such an area for her that she begins right around, you know, there's like a countdown in her brain around like 5 p.m. of like, oh, okay, so, you know, a couple more hours before I have to sleep. What can I do? Like what, you know, maybe I should start meditating, you know, like all of that is just an anxious brain that's not going to be able to do what it needs to do to calm down. To wake up feeling fully rested, to not rely on external drugs, alcohol, etc. to sleep, you know, and that might sound like, oh, well, I'm not doing that, but are you bringing in certain, even little things that can say if you were on a desert island, would that be a problem that you aren't connected to those, you know, lotions and potions and all those things that you might do? And it's not to say that, like, you know, it's certainly not villainizing like a nice bedtime routine. You got your lavender, you know, all those things. Great. And how can we notice if there's a reliance on some of these things? Like that was part of what came up for me too. Like just, I had weirdo reliances on things. Like I would take like Advil PM for no good reason in the States. And then when we would travel, things like that just weren't available. And my brain that had a used to taking something like that, then would get all out of whack of like, oh, well, it's not available. And we want to really look, and it's just an empowering place to come from, not just in this area, but in all areas of life, that really I'm going to be okay even without, you know, that special magnesium rub or whatever. And it's not to say I love those things, but I'm just, you know, we really want to take an inventory. Okay. So, there's tons of things we could get into on this topic, but we only have a couple minutes and then we're going to go into questions and answers. So, I figured this is a good way to kind of an overarching way to look at some possible ways to, you know, possible tools and strategies to transform your sleep. And this overarching umbrella is really just to mind and find your circadian rhythm. And what I mean by that is this is like, for me, one of the coolest topics going of this conversation of circadian rhythm and what impacts it. And like I said, I pointed to earlier in this talk that really we just in 2017, you know, these amazing thinkers just won the Nobel Prize in this area. This is relatively new. So this is what we understand so far, is that there are a couple key things that impact our body's awareness of what time it is. It's overarching topic. It's 24 hours-ish that we have. This a little, you know, little difference, but about 24 hours for each human that we operate on. And if that cycle gets at all messed with, then it gets confused to even the digestive system gets confused, you know, your cellular processing gets confused. Like it really has a ripple effect. So, so just really quick, what that would look like to be connected to your circadian rhythm. That would mean really striving to live within natural parameters as much as possible, despite, you know, all of the wonderful advances in technology. And I'm not against technology at all, and I'll speak to that in a minute. But at the same time, respecting the fact that we are so connected to these primal things. Number one, getting adequate sources of sleep at, you know, at different points of our total day. So what that would look like is waking up and as soon as possible, getting as much, you know, dosage of sleep as you possibly can. What that would also look like, consistency, which I'm going to go into now, consistency around eating times as much as possible. This was a big problem for me because I think I like to be a bit of a contrarian and think that, oh, buck, you know, the status quo, I don't want to do consistent things, blah, blah, blah. No, it helps and supports our body as much as possible to do that. There's something really fun called circadian rhythm intermittent fasting, where it looks at really stopping or having the bulk of your eating happening between sunrise and largely sunset. And there's, you know, nuances around the amount of time around that, but that's basically the takeaway, is that after sunset, trying as much as possible to just really have like water, like what people used to do. And, you know, kind of kitchens closed after sunset for the most part, if you can aim for that. Even just doing that can make a big difference in your sleep quality, because your body's then not having to do an entire process. We often don't understand how much of an impact that makes on our body to be digesting things. So routine bedtime, routine wake up time, dismantling your calendar to making a calendar that works for you to have these particular times really function and not say, oh, well, I had this event and whatever. And it sounds small, but very few people, at least that I'm speaking with, are taking the time to do that. And finally, I alluded to this, tech and sleep. There's a kind of split approach to dealing with behavioral change in sleep right now in the sleep community. And some people are really, you know, pushing for, okay, so a removal of tech at certain times in the night. And other people are looking to, okay, well, we're pretty addicted. So what can we do to work within that addiction? Like they're not going anywhere anytime soon. So from that place, looking at blue blocking lenses, wearable tech to monitor your sleep, programmable light systems like Hue, Philip Hughes, I just mentioned those on there. And I say that because you can set those to, turn down a particular time, turn on a particular time, light boxes, exercise, step count, body temperature, etc. Can all be managed through that wearable tech. So I know that was a lot of information, but I hope that can be useful to some people, and I'm so available and happy to speak more about this topic because I think it's so, so important and impacts every other area of your life, really.
Thank you, Molly. Does anybody have questions? You can ask it right on the bottom of the chat.
Awesome.
So Molly, what have you experienced with the people you've been working with? What are the big issues that they've been dealing with? Is it that they can't fall asleep, or do they continue to get up throughout the night?
So I'm actively working with particular kind of like sleep avatars, so different types of people as I'm putting together this course. So I'm trying to get a well-rounded mix, but what I've been working within is trying to get a grouping of people that both have the sleep onset problems, so the inability to fall asleep as quickly as they'd like. So that is definitely a big issue when we uncover and peel back the layers of what's going on there. Oftentimes what seems to be there are a lot of things, like, we could really go into all that, but it, might be problems in relationship that they're not addressing, and they might be like fighting with some of their partners shortly before their bedtime. And then they have to really be mindful of, the types of conversations that they're willing to get into before bedtime. And again, it's so interesting because when you speak about this stuff from like top down, and as you and I are speaking, you're like, well, of course, just don't have those conversations. But it's not always so simple, because unless you start really looking at this area and you're not resigned to it, you're not just like, oh, well, I suck at sleeping. And if you can really say that, no, this is a skill set that I'm looking to build, then you start to have power in the area and start to say, oh, okay, so there are certain things that I'm doing that might be impact. Maybe, watching some of these Netflix, intense, Stranger Things right before bed is kind of messing with me. And that's silly and basic, but if you compound that night after night after night after night, we've got some really serious problems that can begin to erupt that in the past, honestly, we may not have made the connection that it was sleep related. It can often look like you're being ADD, or you're being edgy, you're being moody, like things that come out that we wouldn't have necessarily immediately connected to. Oh my God, this person's circadian rhythm is all out of whack. They're not getting adequate sleep. This is making an impact on how they're showing up day after day.
Great. We have a question from Georgianne. She says, how do you turn off work mode? When I have a super productive day and I get a lot done, I just can't stop and finish because I'm on a productivity high. How do I combat that?
Yeah, so that's such a good one. So that topic, and thank you for that question, because actually that's something I'm going to need to put in some of these talks right in the beginning, because this whole almost the quote of like, I can't turn off my brain seems to be one of those pervasive conversations. And it looks like it's really amplifying in its occurrence in a lot of different age brackets too. We're particularly seeing this in young adults, but it's really rippling into older populations as well. And so what that comes back to answer that question, the coolest thing about this is if you try to address something like that at night, like right before you're going to sleep, and like, okay, I gotta relax, and like, yeah, good luck, But what it is if you can start actually addressing these things during the day, when it's not even having nothing to do with sleep, that's really where we find can make the big difference in then building up your sleep drive. So your sleep drive relating to the body's push to really fall asleep. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with certain times when, like, maybe night after night things came up, you had events or something, and you only got like a few hours of sleep each night. And then finally by that next night, like, you're just out. Like, very few things could really impact that. And that's and that's some people's cycle, like really push it and then they just collapse pretty much. Right. So if that's the case of something, that you've noticed, then from that place, your body is really set up with that ability to eventually say, like, enough, like, we gotta put ourselves to bed here. And so from there, it's what can we do to increase that sleep drive? So that looks like relaxation techniques throughout the day. And that might sound like woo-woo, but it's really, really important. And relaxation techniques can also come in the form of exercise and, just really stressing your body in a positive way so that it gears it up to be able to fall asleep appropriately. We see that a lot with people. I was working with a graphic designer, and she was always at her computer, right? Not always, but often. And so from that, she discovered that for herself, she needed to then start like getting up and walking throughout the day. She started monitoring her step count, and that was an easy metric for her to follow. So she would really aim to get anywhere from 10,000 to 15,000 steps a day. And that completely transformed her sleep because suddenly she was outside, she was under light, she was moving, she wasn't, just in this kind of static state regular throughout the day. And then that set her up for her evenings to kind of, turn off. So I know that's it's a less direct, and that's what this is why I really believe this is an epidemic, because so many of us, we want the fix now. So we go to the doctor, we get the Ambien, we get the Lunesta, whatever. And that's this Band-Aid that really has some long-term, effects. And whereas if we take this kind of longer term strategy, but much more powerful, arguably, this case by case basis, but as a blanket statement, it arguably has been shown to make more of an impact as far as your sleep quality, your sleep architecture, to naturally deal with some of these things by behavioral shifts. I hope that answered that. Oh, I think you're on mute.
I think that is it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to nerd out on this topic. And I'm so happy to speak with anyone who wants to discuss this anymore. I firmly believe that this is something that as a society, we're going to have to make a real concerted shift around, and it takes a group. So thank you for providing a platform for this.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanya.